Atal Bihari Vajpayee, arguably the greatest of the Indian Prime Ministers, is no more. The first non-Congress Prime Minister to complete a full 5-year term breathed his last a few minutes past 5 p.m. today. He was 93. Vajpayee, who had opted out of public life for years due to prolonged illness, was admitted to the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in June this year, and his health deteriorated steadily ever since. Condolence messages are pouring in from across the world. A natural friend of both his admirers and detractors, the former Prime Minister was a fine orator, great diplomat and a true statesman. Vajpayee was often referred to as the liberal mask of the party, played a distinct role in giving the Sangh and the BJP greater acceptance in Indian polity.
Indeed, Vajpayee shocked the world when he gave the nod for the nuclear test, braving economic sanctions from the developed world. Considered to be a liberal among BJP leaders, he also played a crucial role in giving the Indian economy a big push. Be it the first dedicated ministry for disinvestment or the telecom liberalisation, his reform initiatives stand out. His pet initiative, the Golden Quadrilateral project, is still counted as a benchmark for mega infrastructure development in the emerging world. He also kickstarted big bang tax reforms in line with the Kelkar panel recommendations. As the nation mourns the death of a modern era Prime Minister, we discuss the Vajpayee era of Indian politics as well as Indian economics right here on the India Development Debate this evening. Joining us is a very special panel of guests. Kiran Majumdar Shaw, CMD, Biocon, China NC represents the BJP here. Milind Deora cuts across political lines and joins us representing the Congress Party. Swaminathan Iyer, consulting editor, and Swagrika Ghosh, consulting editor of the Times of India. We're also joined by Neerja Chaudhary, political commentator and columnist. Thanks each one of you for being with us, and I think all of us together join a nation that is mourning the passing away of one of its tallest leaders, Atal Bihari Vajpayee. But Swami, I really want to begin with you. It's a very, very abused, it's a very oft repeated, it's often said when a political leader dies, but this one seemingly is the end of an era.
Well, I would say the Vajpayee era ended some time ago, but it was a very important era. Sandeep said at the beginning that perhaps he was the greatest Prime Minister. You can argue about that. I mean, Jawaharlal Nehru would have a substantial candidacy for being the best Prime Minister, of creating all those institutions when India just became independent. Indira Gandhi's masterstroke of the 1971 could be argued, although then they followed the emergency and other things that went wrong. But yes, I would say Vajpayee would be right up with those two in contention as the greatest Prime Minister ever. I mean, everybody loved him. I mean, in an era when, you know, politics is full of rascals, backstabbers, schemers of all kinds, for somebody to come whom everybody loved. I mean, to the point where even among the opponents, there was a congressman who once told me, you know, marvelingly, he says, Vajpayee is the best congressman in India. I'm not sure the BJP would have taken that as a compliment. But it was the universal acceptance. It's worth remembering that after the destruction of the Babri Masjid, Vajpayee was seen as the only man who was actually seriously dismayed in the BJP. Others were seen as, you know, lip service at most. And in 1996, when the BJP was the largest party after the elections, the BJP tried to form a government and couldn't because it was a pariah. Nobody wanted to touch this Babri Masjid party. It was Vajpayee who worked to overcome that. By 1998, he had managed to get even critics like George Fernandez on board, and he could actually form that government. And not only that, I mean, when they came to power in 98, many people said, this is the Babri Masjid party, you watch, there will be communal riots, there will be communal tensions, there will be slaughter all over India. The very opposite happened. He brought communal temperatures down, there were fewer communal riots than ever before, with, of course, the notable exception of Gujarat 2002, which would remain a major blot. But that apart, he brought respectability and acceptability to the BJP,
Sure.
And then made possible that this is now a mainstream party. This is not a bunch of mosque wreckers, and they are serious, they are acceptable, and but for that foundation, I do
Sure.
not think Mr. Modi would be Prime Minister today.
Absolutely. And, you know, Swami, we do want to spend considerable time discussing his economic legacy, and I think that sort of stands out. But to take a cue from what you said, Nirja, in some sense, do you believe that his greatest sort of achievement is the fact that he brought, you know, he gave sort of political recognition. He, in some sense, established BJP's credentials to run a government, to now be the principal pole of Indian polity?
Yeah, you know, Swami referred to 1996 when the BJP could not, barring Shiv Sena, get any ally. So the government lasted only for 13 days. But between 96, middle of 96 to 98, he brought about a sea change. And I remember in the run-up to the 1998 elections, where the slogan was Apki Bari Atal Bihari. And talking to a taxi driver in Bombay, a Muslim taxi driver, who said, we want this man to come as Prime Minister because we trust him. So look at the change that had taken place. And 1998, he formed a government with many allies, including Mamata Banerjee's party. Mamata Banerjee will not touch the BJP with a barge pole today. JDU, which was called the Samta party then, Jayalalitha, who was a very difficult ally, and all these parties gave him a run around. And even before he was sworn in, he had wanted Jaswant Singh to be his finance minister, and there was so much pressure that that finance minister had to be changed, and it became Yashwant Sinha as the acceptable candidate. So as a coalition leader, coalition government prime minister, it wasn't an easy task. And as Swami was saying, it is his, you know, reaching, it is, I think, you know, the quintessential Vajpayee was a moderate. He understood India. He understood that the middle of the road approach is the only thing that's going to work in India, and that is what made him acceptable to other leaders, other parties. He had an amazing relationship with P.V. Narasimha Rao. P.V. Narasimha Rao had told him in 96, you know, I've got the whole thing ready for a nuclear test. Of course, he wanted to test in 1996, but he felt that, you know, the government had not won on the floor of the House a trust vote, so he couldn't go in for it. But within days of taking over in 98, he went in for it. So Narasimha Rao, and he used him at the UN when there was huge Pakistan pressure on Kashmir. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was part of the official delegation that went to Geneva. So, you know, he had a rapport also with Sonia Gandhi. So across the board with political leaders, they really accepted him. And I think that was one of the reasons why L.K. Advani in 1995 declared him as the prime ministerial face of the BJP as and when the party came to power. It was because his acceptability within a larger political framework. Yes. And I think that is what I feel he will really be remembered. There are many contributions he made, but that is what he will be remembered for.
No, Nirja. No, absolutely. Nirja Chaudhary, give me a minute, because I think we will talk of some of his contributions, both economically and political legacy, in just a while. But you know, the larger point that you just made, that despite him not being the real face of this whole Hindutva raging movement, he really was the man they turned to run the government, to get allies on board to be the prime minister. I mean, Chidambaram says as long as he was at the helm, he resolutely anchored the BJP close to the middle and did not allow the party to swing to the extreme right of the political spectrum. In some sense, Sagarika, I'm coming to you on this. Was this his lasting legacy, that he could be, like Swami said, the congressman in the BJP, or he was perhaps the most moderate, the most acceptable of the faces? He kept the resolution strong. He did not let the BJP go to the extreme right of the political spectrum that some of his opponents today are lauding.
He was indeed the ideal candidate for a coalition prime minister. He was the ideal coalition prime minister. He could take people along, reach over the aisle, build consensus, build reconciliation, and he was, you know, himself middle of the road. The thing is that, as the BJP was growing in its stridently Hindutva phase from 84 to 94, he actually found himself marginalized, having lost rather humiliatingly in 1984 to Madhav Rao Scindia in Gwalior. That was a shock defeat for him. And after that, he became slightly marginalized within the Sangh as the Advani came more to the fore and the stridently Hindutva movement began to grow. So Vajpayee, not that much part of the Mandir movement, not that much part of the militant Hindutva movement. Vajpayee certainly was not a part of the growth of the, the militant Hindutva phase from the early 90s onwards. He was not part of the Ram Mandir movement in that sense. But it was to Vajpayee that the party turned as a prime ministerial candidate simply because of his acceptability across the board. And think about it, he coined the term coalition dharma, and he was able to work so well in coalitions was because he actually organized the Janasangh as part of the Janta coalition. He got all the socialists, the fighting socialists together, that they were a coalition. So he had a lot of experience of working in coalitions. His first 13-day government fell, his second 13-month government fell, but from 1999 to 2004, he ran that massive coalition of disparate partners from 1999 to 2004 and pulled off a really remarkably quite a successful government. So really the man was synonymous with coalition dharma. And I just want to make one point, because when I was a reporter and we had done a story about him in Outlook, we'd written a story, a profile of him, and we'd called him the Swadeshi Nehru after interviewing him. And then we went to present the copy of the story to him, and we thought he wouldn't take kindly to this because he wouldn't like being called a Swadeshi Nehru or a dhoti-clad Nehru, how we had described him. And he looked at us and he said, "Outlook, khatra." And he was very happy, and he invited us to give us the copy, and he read it. And in those days, journalists were not considered the enemy; they were not considered anti-national. He was very open to journalists. You could, hang about near his office. He wouldn't have a holy meeting with journalists. We would, often be at his house. It was a very different era where leaders were much more open. There was nothing off the record for Vajpayee. Everything was on record. You didn't have to ask him, can I say this? Can I write this? Can I quote this? He would, on his own, he would really not expect any kind of secretive communication. So he was a very open person and very, I would say, unafraid to be human. He would share his poetry, which was really about the human factor, anguish and sorrow and disillusionment, not a mechanistic, ruthless pursuit of power politics. He was a politician not afraid to be human and fallible and to show the human side. I think that was a real strength of that era.
Sure.
And I just want to relate one more anecdote, which a senior BJP leader told me. In fact, he had a picture of P.V. Narasimha Rao in his room. Vajpayee used to keep a picture of P.V. Narasimha Rao in his room, and the BJP leader asked him, why do you keep Narasimha Rao's picture in your room? He's from the Congress. And Vajpayee said, well, I don't change my friends according to political fortunes. So that's that's the kind of man he was. He really believed in friends. He reminded me very much of a star at a Kavi Sammelan on the banks of the Ganga, holding forth. He was not existentially threatened by dissent and disagreement. He reveled in debate, reveled in disagreement. There was always a pungency to his political, but he was never offensive and never mocking of his rivals.
Hearing these anecdotes from you, Sagarika, one does say that the end of an era is perhaps the most appropriate way to describe what's the death of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. But Ms. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, thank you for joining us on the phone line from New York. And I'd like you to talk about his legacy as an economic reformer. Many believe that he perhaps was the most progressive, market-focused, market reform-focused prime ministers that we've had. And which are the reforms that stand out to your mind? Whether it was a massive infrastructure push with the Golden Quadrilateral project, the adherence to fiscal discipline with the FRBM Act, the revolution that he brought about in the telecom space with the NTP 1999, the early steps on GST that he took, divestment, privatization. What is it that would stand out to your view, ma'am? Ms. Shaw?
I feel, can you hear me?
I can hear you, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yeah. So to me, Vajpayee stood out as a modernist. He was very, very keen on driving technology. He wanted a knowledge-led economy. He was, focused on being a technology-led nation. And I remember the few times I met him was really to discuss biotechnology. And he himself said to me, he said, it is IT is India today and BT is Bharat tomorrow. That's the way he coined it. And I remember he was so interested in new technologies. And, he was so pro-business. He was so, focused on doing away with bureaucracy in terms of business ease. And I still remember when Jaswant Singh was the finance minister, he was, he discussed FIPB and said, to me, FIPB is not the promotion board, but the prevention board, and we should get rid of it. This was how, astute and, far-thinking he was as a prime minister. He really wanted India to be a modern nation and a very, very prosperous nation because he believed that business would definitely drive prosperity in every way. So, he was so inspirational, and I think everyone before me has, talked about the greatness of this man, that he was truly the kind of political leader that everybody admired and respected across party lines. I think that was greatness.
No, I couldn't agree with you more as far as your analysis is concerned. But the thing that really stands out for me as far as Mr. Vajpayee is concerned, that he led a coalition of 23 political parties, and yet he could in 1999, when, privatization was a taboo word, it was a bad word, he had a separate ministry for disinvestment. He had the courage to go ahead with 30 strategic sales in his tenure. Ms. Shaw, what will you attribute this courage of conviction to? I mean, he wasn't running a majority government. That kind of privatization had not happened before, and yet he could go ahead and do it. How do you believe he could convince allies and his own partymen? I'm presuming there was opposition within. Ms. Shaw?
I think he was a very practical, common sense person who understood that, he needed investment if he wanted to build infrastructure, and that was going to come with divestment. So, I think he was a very, very no-nonsense person. He would take very, very clear, practical approaches, and that's what also made him very effective. And that's why we saw a lot of early policies coming out of his regime. Like you mentioned, the disinvestment, the initiative that he somehow got all his coalition partners to support him in. Some of these, very, very cumbersome policies that he did away with, and so on and so forth. So I really think that, he was a man ahead of his time. That's why he was called so visionary, and he was also very effective.
That's a good point you're making. He was in some sense a visionary, and he had a common sense approach to governance, which I think is what in some sense, makes him a standout leader. But Shrinate NC, how could he have convinced allies on economic reforms, running a coalition of over 20 parties? Was it just the moral authority that he had as a leader that his decisions, weren't really seen through political prism? Because, whether it was a George Fernandez, whether it was Mamta Banerjee, these are all leaders whose sort of economic thinking is more attuned to, socialism, more left of center, political leaders, political parties, and yet he, saw them, made them see value in progressive reforms.
Well, at the outset, let me please say that this is not just a loss to the entire BJP family and every one of the 11 crore party members that we have in this large space and expanse of ours, but I think that also as a Swayamsevak for the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, somebody who rose from the ranks, who went on to being participative in the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, and then rose in the cadre too. To be a 10-time parliamentarian probably must have taught him a lot. And you keep asking me, why was there so much acceptability? I think for two reasons. One is, there is a saying which says that, you know, a politician is only thinking of the next election. It is only a statesman who thinks of the next generation. And I'm sure a lot of his contemporaries did believe that here is a statesman who crosses above the petty politics of belonging to a particular ideology and reaches out when it comes to national interest. And this has been shown not just on the floor of the House, in Parliament. His incredible speeches, his oratory skills is only one aspect of mesmerizing public and the political class alike. But I think more importantly, his vision for a powerful India, whether it came to his view on nuclear aspects such as Pokhran, etc., or whether it was his strong belief that India needs to have good relationships with other countries. So I think on a lighter note, the way he wooed contemporaries from different parties to be a part of the NDA and reach out to almost 20 allies could have been one of the facts that he was a great foodie. I don't know how many of you know that he actually loved to entertain people and discuss, deliberate on serious issues over a meal. So that approach, his accessibility to all, his public demeanor, where he was always warm and engaging with the smallest karyakarta to the biggest leader, all of this made him extremely acceptable, not just to the cadre but also to the political class. And I'm sure that if everyone has to analyze and come up with few reasons why they admire Atal Bihari Vajpayee, one of which would be his oratory, second of which would be his human relations across the board. So I think that answer says it all.
Right, right. And you see the kind of people who are actually coming in, visuals that are playing on our screens right now. You've got people from across the political spectrum. You just had Prime Minister Modi and Amit Shah, and now you have Yashwant Sinha walk-in. So a lot of political adversaries of today who were allies till yesterday now walking in to pay their homage to their leader. But Milind, thank you for being very patient and thank you for staying with us right here. But you know, in some sense, many would say that Mr. Vajpayee was perhaps being pragmatic as far as his economic liberalization was concerned. He perhaps just followed and adhered to the policies that were ushered in by Manmohan Singh and P.V. Narasimha Rao. He did not want to have this false bravado of discarding it. Was he tolerant of these policies, or was he just being simply a pragmatic politician who believed that this was the right thing to do for the Indian economy?
No, I think if you go back to some of his interviews, even before he became Prime Minister in '98 and in the run-up to the '98 elections, at that time in '98, to be talking about disinvestment, to be talking about privatization, to be talking about making the state smaller, more efficient, was pretty out there, and one could argue was pretty reckless also politically. So I think to his credit, he was someone who did what he believed in. I think in today's politics, a lot of people just try to sort of demonstrate loyalty to a particular ideology. They change or forget who they really are. That's something he never did. But I think, coming back to the earlier points that were raised by different people about how he was able to sort of implement a lot of these reforms, I think he had the ability to generate a lot of political capital, not just within his party, not just within other organizations related to his party, not just within the coalition, but even with the opposition. My father would often tell me, my late father would often tell me, when he was the chairman of the Parliamentary Finance Committee and a standing committee on finance. And at that time, Yashwant Sinha was the finance minister. And Vajpayee's, one of his reforms was to allow for private sector participation in insurance. And he knew, for example, that my father was very close to the United States, was always somebody who was for better, improved relations between India and the United States. And he had found out that Jaswant Singh, who at the time was foreign minister, would jokingly refer to my father, because he represented South Mumbai, as the MP from Manhattan. And Vajpayee used that to bring my father on board as chairman of the Standing Committee on Finance, to get him as a congressman, to get the Congress and the opposition to support the reforms and liberalization in the insurance sector. So he was a great man in that sense. As I tweeted earlier, I think people like Atal Bihari Vajpayee, people like Somnath Chatterjee, who we also lost recently, they're a dying breed. They're a unique group of politicians who unfortunately they don't make them like that anymore. And I'm just glad, as somebody who got elected in 2004, that I got to meet Atal Bihari Vajpayee when he was Prime Minister, when he lost the elections, saw him in Parliament, had a person like Somnath Chatterjee as Speaker. And I think in today's political environment, which is very, very hostile, it's very combative, it's very confrontational, I really believe that these politicians taught India and will continue to teach future generations that we have to be collaborative, because that's how India gets ahead. When you can actually sit across the table, charm the opposition sometimes, build personal relationships with them, you can get a lot done for the country.
Right. Milind, I don't think anybody will dispute the fact that they don't make politicians of that kind anymore. That era, that generation is over. That bonhomie in Parliament is gone. You really see camps. You really see them divided.
No, but I think that
there's no bonhomie that we see in Parliament. But I have a quick question for Neerja Chaudhary. Yeah. Absolutely, it's under a lot of stress. Neerja Chaudhary, coming to you. We asked this question of Mr. Vajpayee, was he pragmatic in following what Manmohan Singh and P.V. Narasimha Rao had brought in? But was he also, in some sense, did he also have the credential to resist and handle the Swadeshi lobby and the RSS pressure a lot better than perhaps what we are witnessing today? I mean, he continued with economic liberalization. He opened FDI. He talked about insurance and FDI. And we all know it was not just resisted by the RSS or the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. It was also resisted by the BJP within. And yet he could go ahead with it. So did he in some sense handle the Swadeshi lobby a lot better? Could he resist that pressure a lot better?
He did a tightrope walk. The Swadeshi lobby, were pretty assertive after a point. You remember even the finance minister's choice, as I was saying earlier, he wanted Jaswant Singh and the RSS lobby wanted somebody else. Mr. Yashwant Sinha was the consensus choice. And he went ahead with the reform process. Much of it was not liked by a section in the Sangh as well as the Swadeshi lobby. This was open secret. And, so they also, the RSS and these front organizations of the RSS also used to target Brajesh Mishra, his principal secretary, who was really the karta dharta. I've heard Mr. Vajpayee say to people, now you've told me, but have you told Brajesh this? Please go and tell him. So the nuts and bolts of it, the implementation of decisions was done by Brajesh Mishra. But I was trying to recall during the day today, often, giving a poetic formulation to something to deal with pressure was something he was very good at. And I think one of the years, over New Year, he'd come up with a formulation, I couldn't remember the exact thing, which was addressed to this lobby, and in some way it quietened them after Atalji had come out with it. So yes, he used pragmatism, he used poetry, all to do, as I said, the tightrope walk that he had to do. He had allies, very difficult allies on the one hand, and he had the Swadeshi Jagran Manch and the other organizations, the BMS and others on the other hand, and he did manage to do that tightrope walk because his was the first non-Congress government to last its full term. Of course, the first 98 government went after 13 months, but the 99 to 2004 lasted its fourth full term.
Oh yes, tightrope walk indeed. He did. But Swami, you know, we can't not talk about the Golden Quadrilateral project, which in some sense was the sort of one project whose and the reforms in the telecom sector are steps whose benefits we're still seeing, and we haven't seen a project of that scale, of that magnitude implemented, and of such spillover effects to the economy that in some sense kick-started a revival of sorts. So how would you assess just the scale and the execution of the Golden Quadrilateral project?
I don't think it was that unique. I mean, even the previous government, even in Narasimha Rao's time, there was this talk of need to go ahead with infrastructure. In fact, there was talk at that time of expressways, which never came about at that particular point of time. But Vajpayee, I mean, everybody understood the importance of infrastructure. I think Vajpayee was inspirational in having this idea of the quadrilateral and a north-south and east-west corridor, that from east to west, north to south, in all directions, he would create this giant network which would therefore support the rise of trade and industry. But while that is very important, I would give even more emphasis to his Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. Till then, there used to be the lip service for the villages have to be uplifted, and under food for work and so on. They were always making all these kacha roads which were washed away in the monsoon and disappeared. Vajpayee saw how useless that was and said the aim is not just to give some off-season work for workers. Let us have pakka roads, solid macadam roads to every single village. I would say of all the various rural initiatives that penetrated the countryside and is an extremely important complement to just the Golden Quadrilateral. So the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana plus the roads, I think those two went together, they reinforced one another, and especially in the backward states, the Bimaru states, north and central India, I would say it was the rural network which was even more important in helping those backward states to come up, and then they took part in this huge surge in GDP growth that took place by the end of the BJP regime. From 2003 they hit 8% growth, and then you continued with 8% growth for a full decade. So as I said, he understood the importance of infrastructure, and he understood the importance not only for trade and industry on the Golden Quadrilateral, but of penetrating the countryside, getting to every village.
Sure.
He had that same aim actually, that at the end of it all, this should happen to telecom too.
Absolutely. In fact, Swami,
a cell phone shouldn't be a rich man's privilege.
Absolutely.
And today he solved the telecom mess that was there, and today we have people below the poverty line everywhere with the cell phone, and all those reforms, the new structure given was at that particular time of Vajpayee's.
Absolutely. And Milind, I want you to come in on that, since you've been in the telecom ministry. It was Sunil Mittal who sort of put out a comment today calling Vajpayee in some sense the father of modern Indian telecom, and the reforms that we saw in the telecom space, like Swami pointed out, the move to bring in revenue share in one stroke brought in viability to the industry, brought tariffs down, and then we had the multiplier effects for the economy at large, which we've seen for decades since then. So how would you look back at specific reforms in the telecom space and the impact that it's had to the nation at large?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to go into, saying who's the father of modern telecom in India. I mean, to Rajiv Gandhi's credit, in the mid-80s when he was Prime Minister of India, I would say that his initiatives in the mid-80s actually laid the foundation for the telecom revolution, for the IT and IT-enabled sector revolution. But certainly Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, there was Pramod Mahajan as IT minister at the time. I still remember there was a man called Devang Mehta who was the first founding president of NASSCOM. And Vajpayee certainly gave it a massive push. Under his time, the IT sector, IT-enabled sector was marketed globally. Brand India became very, very powerful to global corporates who wanted to outsource to Indian BPOs and to Indian IT-enabled companies. Certainly in the area of wireless telephony, there were a lot of reforms enacted during Vajpayee's time. The whole idea, for instance, in 2003, before he demitted office, before we came to power and Dr. Manmohan Singh became Prime Minister, of suggesting that spectrum should be bundled with a license, for which, incidentally, we got into a lot of trouble during the 2G controversy. It was a great idea, and it was not our idea. It was not our idea to not auction spectrum. It was Vajpayee government's idea. Very few people know that, and I think it was a great idea in hindsight. Unfortunately, we got a lot of political flack for it. That's a different issue. But the vision to say that spectrum should not be auctioned, even if it will cause a loss to the government and to the national exchequer, and spectrum, in fact, should be bundled with the license fee, so that we can encourage and increase teledensity in India, so that we can reach far-flung areas, so that we can use USO money to actually reach areas and create techno-commercial feasibility where no telecom operator would want to go, the northeast, hilly areas. That certainly was Vajpayee's vision. So I think a lot of the credit for where India is today in terms of being hailed as an IT superpower, in terms of being one of the largest and fastest growing internet economies in the world, would certainly go to Atal Bihari Vajpayee.
Right. No denying that, and I think in history we need to apportion credit to every government. Atal Bihari Vajpayee gets a large credit for the mobile revolution in India, but like Milind points out there, it goes back all the way to Rajiv Gandhi. That makes us a truly democratic republic, does it not? I think we'll take a quick break on this note. We'll be back in just a moment, and we will talk about personal anecdotes of the man. We will also discuss the politics of dissent and disagreement, but with dignity. We are tracking the Atal Bihari Vajpayee legacy both politically and in the economic landscape, and it's time we turn the question to his mode of governance. How did he truly run a federal government of sorts? And Shaina, it's really over to you. You speak to a whole host of his cabinet ministers and people who worked with him, and the kind of, the output that's coming on Atal Bihari Vajpayee really tells you the stature of a man. I mean, you had the president, you've got leaders of the opposition, you've just had former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh walk in with his wife to pay his tribute. But just to come back to how he really ran his government, he trusted people, he picked the best talent, trusted them, empowered them. He believed in delegating responsibility, delegating authority. He did not really believe in the centralization of power model. And that is perhaps what saw some stellar work happen, whether it was Suresh Prabhu, whether it was Mr. Mahajan, Pramod Mahajan, a whole host of ministers who performed very well, because authority was delegated to them. It wasn't centralized like we see today.
Well, Supriya, I think every leader has their own style of functioning, and I think the kind of question you're raising is obviously trying to suggest that he was different from the current dispensation. I think the current dispensation has done a fantastic job when it comes to delivering on policies, implementation, irrespective of what you would want to read as an underlying line. But I want to say that Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji's tenure had also seen a lot of young promising leaders, one of which is our Prime Minister today. Don't forget that Narendra Modi ji was the Chief Minister of Gujarat when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. So he created and nurtured a lot of young aspirational members of the party as leaders of the future, be it the late Pramod Mahajan ji or so many others that I would like to name, but at the cost of of leaving out somebody, I choose not to. I think that human relations was obviously his greatest forte. Of course, his passion of poetry, his passion of, for people in public life who just remember a single line which says, Ki Kamal Khilega, Andhera Chhatega. All his poems are things that we have read growing up. So I think that he had a lot of other aspects to his life. And as I said earlier, yes, he was also a great foodie and he made people connect through food. I remember our late Member of Parliament, Jaivanti Ben Mehta, who used to make a Gujarati thali for him every time he came to Mumbai, because he used to love Gujarati food, and then continue to take those tiffins to Delhi. So I think his connect went beyond just leadership and creating leaders, but he did create a party that believed that this is one big family, and that continues today. So I don't buy this argument of a centralized approach or not. In a large party, and especially in a party as large as ours, I don't think even Vajpayee ji would have envisaged 11 crore members and being the world's largest political party today.
Sure.
So I think that we need to remember the style of every leader, but understand and respect that every leader can rule differently
and
as
in a
long
different
as they
context.
impact
I take
and
that
empower
point.
lives.
Okay, I take that point. But Sagarika, slightly tricky question. How do you think would Mr. Vajpayee have ruled India today? The India of today that's polarized, divided at some extent, you know, where there's this anger fueled by, you know, the advent of social media and whatnot, where people spout opinion and venom at each other. How would he have handled the India of today?
I think that's a very good question, Sandeep. I think he would have been a complete misfit. Would Mr. Vajpayee have been on Twitter? Would he have been on Facebook engaging in sharp retorts with his rivals? I don't see that as part of his personality at all. Would he have thrived in the era of 24/7 media, where you need to constantly have your sound bites at the ready, you constantly need to come up with a smart one-liner? I don't think so either. He had those long pregnant pauses when he used to speak. I remember covering one of his Independence Day speeches, and it was so full of pauses that, you know, there was almost a somnolent effect that he would create with his speeches. But there was a lot of emotion and sentiment and a lot of, you know, as I said, the human factor. But I think in today's times he would probably have been a misfit. But on the other hand, maybe he would not have been a misfit also, because, you know, I think the strength of his government from 2009 to 2000, from 2004 to 2000, I beg your pardon, from 1999 to 2004, was in fact that he was able to delegate, that he was able not to have a centralized structure, that he was able to give his ministers their head. They were able to be autonomous in their ministries. He attracted talent, and also he was able to create very positive diplomatic outreach as far as India was concerned. I think one of the things we haven't touched on, Sandeep and Supriya, is actually his very remarkable efforts towards Pakistan. Repeatedly Vajpayee reached out. He went on that Lahore bus ride from Lahore to Delhi, which was a rollicking bus ride with Devanand, Shatrughan Sinha, all kinds of very colourful characters on that bus. At the Minar-e-Pakistan in Lahore, there was an Indian Prime Minister coming to the monument of Pakistan, talking about the message of friendship that he was bringing from Hindustan, and it was a very moving, memorable moment. He repeatedly reached out. Then of course there was the Kargil War, but there was the Agra summit as well. After the Agra summit, he went to Kashmir, and in Kashmir at the Sher-e-Kashmir Stadium in Srinagar, he reached out in Urdu, chaste Urdu, to Pakistan, again calling for peace.
I will have to come in there, Sagarika. We are really running out of time here. Okay. Okay, Sagarika, I'm sorry, I'm really running out of time here. I will have to give a quick last word to Swami. And Swami, what is the lasting anecdote that comes to your mind as far as Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the politician, the poet, the consensus maker and all of that is concerned?
Interviewed him before the 98 election. And as we went, you know, we began to take him through these various core parts of the BJP program, like, you know, Kashmir Special Status, Minorities Commission. On each one of those, he was backpedaling from the hard line. So when he had been, he said, Mr. Vajpayee, you are diluting the entire BJP line. He said, no, Mr. Iyer. We were once a small North Indian party spreading. And as we spread over more and more areas of India, we found we had to take into account the opinion of larger and larger sections that we had not done earlier. This is not dilution, it is evolution. I think that to me really summed up how he had grown beyond the original BJP, and how therefore he had this large encompassing look. where consistently it always looked as though Vajpayee is, he looked so much better than his own party.
Good to look why he was looking better than his party, because he didn't believe in dilution but in evolution. Swaminathan Iyer summing it up so beautifully there. Completely timed out. Milind, Shaina, Shagurika, Swami and Neerja, really appreciate you joining us with your perspective. I wish we could have continued this conversation for a little longer, but really timed out. Thanks for joining us here at ET Now. Supriya?
And since Atalji was not just known for being an excellent parliamentarian and for his parliamentary tactics, but being a poet par excellence, we have to end with one of my personal favorites this evening. Toote hue sapnon ki kaun sune siski, अंतर की चिर व्यथा पलकों पर ठिठकी, हार नहीं मानूंगा, रार नहीं ठानूंगा, काल के कपाल पर लिखता मिटाता हूँ, गीत नया गाता हूँ. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good night.